touched on this. It's what everybody knows that just ain't so. And first, you have to, in many cases, re-educate people, because it's much harder to disabuse someone of a cherished notion than to teach it from scratch. And the psychologists have a term for this. It's called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance. And you know, when people say, well, what do you mean Travis didn't draw the line? What do you mean Davy didn't go down swinging old Betsy? Well, what you know, because
everybody knows.
Everybody knows that. And that's probably the biggest challenge, to dissuade what everybody knows that just isn't true.
Now, I think that from, you know, we teach here at the Alamo, but we don't test. So I actually have a better audience, because when I talk to people, they're not wondering, is this going to be on the test? And it's like, well, I'm going to ask them a question I want to know the answer to, not have to worry about, am I responsible for this? But it's that what has happened over the past, well, I think you can look at how cursive writing is not being taught. And then you have to go, well, what else isn't being taught? And so when you have a discussion with somebody and you want to reference the American Revolution and you're not sure that they know what the American Revolution was or when it took place, you have to not only be able to teach what you want, but you've got to go back and go, well, I'm going to have to teach you this. But you can't do it in the sense that, oh, you know, you're devoid of information and I'm going to provide that for you. But you have to do it in a way that it's engaging and there's something in it for them. That if I listen to you wander around and talk for a while and it's interesting, I'll stay and listen. And so it's essentially, as Steve said, it's unteaching sometimes, but it's sometimes going back to those very basic things. I had a teacher who teaches teachers come to a session that I did once, and I was talking about small r republicanism. And at the end of it, she came up to me and said, I have a question. And so I said yes, and she said, what do I tell my students a republic is? Now think about that. You know, the idea of, you know, we all go, and to the republic. But she's going, what do I tell my students a republic is?
Well, there are certain of us who immediately say, republic. I like the sound, I love the sound of the word. But you know, really, to a certain generation,
which is probably the truest thing.
It's not a bad definition.
In that whole movie,
yeah,
is the idea of the republic. And when we talk about Crockett, when we talk about, well, you can name any of them, you know, they are small r Republicans, and they are fierce in their belief that the republic is the best form of government.
Well, and when David Crockett joined the Texas Army in Nacogdoches, he had to sign a document that said, I give my allegiance to the Texas government or any government that might be formed in the future. And he refused to sign that until he had written in any future Republican government.
And it goes back to, if you've got a teacher that teaches teachers that's saying, I don't know what a republic is, that's a problem. And so, you know, we have a problem, and it's a lot of teaching the basics. Now, here's what's key, is we have been trained to look at U.S. history. And so we go, well, we know what a Republican is, a small r Republican. We know U.S. history, we know political parties. Mexican history mirrors U.S. history in many different ways because what's being replicated is the small r Republican system. And so when we talk about the Texas Revolution, what we tell people is the Texas Revolution is an event that occurs within an ongoing Mexican Civil War. And people go, Civil War? I've heard of that. And so it gives them a point to go, I know what a Civil War is, but what's this Mexican Civil War that you're talking about? And you get to talk about the nature of government. That the nature of government is, especially when you talk about, well, you could talk about kings and princes, that there's always tension between the kings and the princes, between the entities of that government. Where's the power going to be located? You know, the king wants more power, the princes want more power. Okay, you just go, okay, what if you got a national government and you got states? You got things like states' rights. And again, we go, Civil War, states' rights, that's a Southern thing. Well, one of the things that I found very interesting is that the legislature of the state of Coahuila in Texas, after Santa Anna takes power, they writes a declaration, proclamation, and they say, essentially, the national government is created by the states. It doesn't have the authority to reform itself. That has to be done by the states. And what they essentially are talking about is states' rights. And they're also talking about a term that has come up recently, but also came up during the Civil War in 1832 in Carolinas, nullification.
Okay, at this point, my students are saying, okay, this is way too complicated.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's, the challenge of teaching is, all this is connected to, all things in history are connected. And the past is connected to the present, and we're all connected to the future. And so I think the challenge is, how do you get students at any age? And it's actually easier when you're dealing with people as they age because they have history. When you're a seventh grader, or when you're sitting in Steve's class and you may be in your 20s, you still don't have that much of a sense of history. But it's got to be that question.
Think about it for a minute. It's hard for people who have not lived 2 decades to have any sort of long-term perspective. Because, and if you ever talk to young people, all of their references are personal. Well, when I was in the 5th grade, or when I was in the 6th grade, because they can't say, well, back in the 60s, or back in the 70s, or back in the, like we can do. I mean, they just don't have, so trying to teach history to young people is
and I think that goes back to what kind of we started off with, is that we were lucky in that time period where we had action figures, but our action figures, weren't Star Wars figures.
We had the Marvel's Alamo Play Center.
But they were based on historical characters.
We would sit on the floor and play with our little plastic armies.
But again, it was an introduction to history. History was important.
Well, when I was a young man, and just getting into this biz, because whenever I went to college in the 70s, so I delighted in exploding the myths. And I says, well, George Washington didn't really chop down that church. Oh, he didn't, Doctor? No. There's this guy named Mason. And they said, well, Travis didn't really draw a line, because there's this guy named Zuber. Okay. That's what I used to do. I now go in and I says, well, Washington really didn't chop down the cherry tree. Why would he have wanted to do that? Travis didn't draw. What are you talking about? Guys, I swear to God, they don't know the myths. So I mean, forget about they don't know the myths.
And here at the Alamo, we're getting to the point where we ask people and they say, no, I haven't seen the John Wayne movie. And who is John Wayne?
Oh, I know.
When we were making the movie, my movie, Billy Bob's movie, in 2003, I was the historical advisor. I was talking to Patrick Wilson, the young man playing Travis, and I said, well, you know, in the John Wayne movie, and he said, well, I've never seen the John Wayne movie. I said, you cut me to the quick. I said, you've never seen the John Wayne movie? He said, no. He said, because I just hadn't. And then when I got this gig, I purposely didn't, because I didn't want Harvey's performance to color mine, which I think is valid. But I was speechless. What do you mean you've not seen it? You're the guy playing Travis, you've not seen it. But he had. He was 28. Of course he had.
Well, other than feeling older now.
Yeah, thanks.
Older than both of you.